Hi, we're joined by Bryna from Jigsaw Agency. Bryna, if you could introduce what Jigsaw does and what your role is at Jigsaw.
100%. Hi, I'm Bryna. I basically work with Robbie across all of the campaigns here at Jigsaw, especially with the comms, the messaging, design, and engagement side of things. I've always been in the Aussie startup scene, mostly working closely with like investors and getting a feel of how they make their decisions, understanding how they think and operate. At Jigsaw, basically, we are a plug-in marketing support for any campaigns who are trying to raise via the equity crowdfunding scene. And yeah, we essentially cover off a specialized niche part of making a race successful.
Today, we're going to be covering off on some of the benefits for your business that aren't capital. Because you're going out to such a broad range of people, there's a really big marketing benefit and brand awareness benefit to doing equity crowdfunding. I guess if you could cover off on some of the ways that equity crowdfunding can elevate your business from a marketing point of view.
The wonderful thing about equity crowdfunding is that you are really just building a relationship with people who don't understand or aren't aware of your business. So, in one way, yes, you are starting an equity crowdfunding campaign to raise funds, right? But at the same time, what happens in tandem is you're actually reaching out to a broader network of people via the way that we actually do our digital marketing and digital advertising campaigns. We don't just specifically target niche groups, although that is a component of what we do, but ultimately we are going to a really broad audience across Australia. So one of the benefits that come with that is awareness and engagement and interest of people who usually would never have heard of your company. They are now exposed to your company. So that's, I think, one of the biggest benefits that a lot of businesses who go through equity crowdfunding campaigns come to realize towards the end of it, that they actually have this kind of opportunity to really reach out and kind of grow their audience. An example of that would be a company that we worked for, the People's Plant. They went into the equity crowdfunding scene with, I want to say, around 1,000 followers on Instagram, that sort of level of audience. And then via their equity crowdfunding campaign, they actually built a community, a long-lasting community, especially of around 5,000 followers in about 5 weeks. So we see this kind of interest come in, and yes, you do raise funds, but at the same time, you're actually also building your brand presence. So I think that's a great benefit of equity crowdfunding that a lot of people don't realize until they've actually gone through it themselves.
I guess we could use the example of a business with a product, so say an e-com business or a consumer-based business. Apart from Instagram followers or the general brand awareness, is there some actual ways that businesses can utilize their investors or the people that express interest to sell their products?
I think 100%, because there's a lot of components that influence what type of engagement you get after your raise or during your raise. Let's say for the likes of an e-com brand, one of the companies that we worked on their equity crowdfunding campaign, they actually built a community of investors who built this relationship with the company and then therefore wanted to be advocates of the company and therefore purchased a lot of their products or like became subscribers or members with the community that the companies actually have. The good thing about like equity crowdfunding as well is with general e-com practices, you're not necessarily building a relationship with the company, you're selling them product. Whereas with with equity crowdfunding, you're building this relationship that builds advocacy and then actually drives revenue to the company later on down the line.
You mentioned with investors, you can engage a community. If you were to give any advice to a company that's already done equity crowdfunding on how to engage the community that you mentioned, how would they go about doing that?
I think what a lot of people tend to do after they raise is kind of immediately forget that they've built and nurtured a relationship with these people across like a 5 week period. Like essentially how you turn EOIs into investors is you build a relationship with them, you make them understand your company, you make them hear what your company is trying to do, and they ultimately build trust and a relationship with your company. But a lot of companies, after they finish their campaign, they don't tend to maintain that level of communication with the people that they've essentially worked very hard over the last 5 weeks to build that relationship. So what I always say to the people that we work with is you already have this group, maybe sometimes in the thousands, depending on how big your campaign went, of EOIs and investors who showed interest in your company. That's the whole reason they submitted an expression of interest. It would be such a shame not to continue this and see what that level of engagement can bring to your company. It could be to drive revenue, it could be to build advocacy, it could also potentially be a great way for you to have a really engaged group of people leading up to your next raise if you're considering one. So I would always recommend just maintaining that level of engagement. Send them emails, send them comms and emails from time to time. Make sure that they feel seen and heard. Have like a space where this community can thrive, and really try and nurture that level of relationship to go into something a little bit more like advocacy or driving revenue. So I think just remembering that these people have actively made a decision to tell you, hey, I'm interested. I want to know what your company's talking about. I want to know where your company is going. I think that the best way to do that is to have a place where your community can sit, and then they can thrive, and then they can also be advocates for you later down the line.
Yeah, it'd be great to know what makes you different from just your general kind of digital marketing agency.
I touched on this earlier, but e-com brands and the way that they advertise, the way that they run their marketing campaigns, one of the reasons why Jigsaw is different and why we are important and why we have a space in the industry is because we understand how to communicate to investors. The same way that people, marketing specialists who run e-com brands, they understand how to communicate to their customers. We are the same, but in the sense where investors, you're not really aiming for a touch and go relationship where you have, let's say, an advertising campaign for some merch that you're selling or for apparel. Yes, ultimately, let's say for an apparel brand like a clothing store, they do ultimately want you to come back, but at the same time, they're just selling you a product. Let's say you have a 20% off summer sale. They're just selling that campaign to you and hoping that revenue comes in. Whereas the differences with the audiences in equity crowdfunding campaigns is that you are genuinely trying to build a relationship with them. Even during the campaign, during the EOI campaign and the investment offer, you are physically calling these people up to be like, hey, I want to start this dialogue with you for you to understand what the company is about and what we're trying to do. So understanding how best to communicate to your EOIs, especially because they're cold EOIs, and having them nurtured across that 3-week EOI period, becoming an investor, I think is a really integral part of what makes the equity crowdfunding space so interesting and so different to your general marketing practices. So I think like a big part of what we do and a big part of what I do at Jigsaw is making sure that the messaging is pretty much perfect, like leading up to, like in the prep stages leading up to the EOI campaign, because essentially we want to make sure that our messaging is strong and direct, but at the same time, we want to entice our EOI list to understand that, hey, this is a great investment opportunity and here's why. And we are people who want to like ultimately connect with you as well. So understanding the mindset of an investor, I suppose, is one of the most important pieces. And obviously, like throughout your campaigns, we do tweak messaging to see how people respond to certain statements or certain statistics or certain tones of voice. But we ultimately want to make sure that representation for the company comes very clear through the messaging and all of the communication pieces that we deliver across that 5-week period. Like that's why we spend so much time building these funnels of like, how do we engage these people best, and how like we've put so much effort and intention behind building the email comms and like the structure of those and how we engage with different databases. We have the customer database that usually, this is the database that companies usually have going into the raise. We have the EOI list, we have the investor list, we have the broad funnel list. So like there's a lot of intention that goes behind the messaging and comms that we send out during the ECSF raise, because we understand that the nature of this audience, of their audience, is so different to what you would usually have in like general marketing practices that a company might, in like consider. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Bryna. And yeah, it really does sound like a lot of work goes into this 5 week period. And it's such a shame when businesses don't utilize that marketing aspect of their raise to drive revenue or drive shareholder support or prepare those EOIs and also people that did end up investing for their next raise, whether that's equity crowdfunding or another avenue. So that was really helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Bryna. If anyone wants to find Jigsaw, how would they go about doing that?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. You can find us on Instagram or LinkedIn. We're just jigsawAgency.co. You can also find me on LinkedIn, just Bryna. And then my email is bryna@jigsawagency.com.au. But yeah, we're always open to having a conversation. Part of the reason why Robbie and I love this space so much is the types of businesses that we meet and the types of founders that we meet. You just never get bored, and we'd love to hear your story. And even if you're not considering CSF or you are, there's always room for us to work together. So yeah, feel free to find us on LinkedIn or Instagram and just email us if you'd like to start that dialogue.
It is so important as your first port of call to speak to not only the platform that you're going to use for equity crowdfunding, but the marketing agency, as we know, can make up 75% of all the investors that come into an equity crowdfunding raise. So they play such a crucial role in equity crowdfunding. So it's important for them to be your first or second discussion after you meet with an equity crowdfunding platform. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Isaac. See you.